What's up? It's me, Don Tolliver. If I could describe the Bose Ultra Open earbuds, I think I would describe it as very seamless. It can definitely be something that you can style. It's like earring candy. Check out Bose.com for more.
What's 2FA security on Kraken? Let's say I'm captaining my soccer team, and we're up by a goal against, I don't know, Soda Springs FC. Do we relax? No way. Time to create an extra line of defense and protect that lead. That's like 2FA on Kraken, a surefire way to keep what you already have, safe and sound. Go to Kraken.com and see what crypto can be. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss. Cryptocurrency services are provided to U.S. and U.S. territory customers by Payward Interactive Inc., PWI DBA Kraken. View PWI's disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. My guest today is Pedro Domingos, Professor Emeritus of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington. He's an AI researcher, a tech industry insider, and the author of the best-selling book, The Master Algorithm: How the Quest for the Ultimate Learning Machine Will Remake Our World. Recently, he's turned his hand to political fiction in an often hilariously funny book called, the title is 2040, A Silicon Valley Satire. It is a lot of fun, but it also has a lot to say about some very serious issues facing us that concern technology and politics. And so I'm really happy to have him on today. Pedro Domingos, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I guess I wanted to start by pointing out to folks, as I think I did a little bit in the intro, that you're just not some random guy who happened to write a book about, politics and tech. You know a lot about computer science, a lot about AI. And so I thought it would be good to jump off there. Maybe you could talk a little about how your professional expertise, how what you've seen happening in AI led you to write this book.
Yeah, I've been an AI researcher all of my professional life. And what's happened with AI in the last decade, let's say, is that it's become something that is not just for the experts to know about. I think everybody needs to know about AI and how it affects their lives as professionals, as citizens, as just, private people. So, that started with a master algorithm, which was a popular science about machine learning for a broad audience. And then I realized that often a lot, just talking with people and journalists and policymakers and CEOs and everything, which, by the way, has been quite fun. Often the best way to convey something is to tell people a good story about it. So I wanted to tell people a story about the tech industry, and not just, the tech per se, but how the tech interacts with society and with politics today, because AI has, from both directions, AI has gone into politics big time. Politicians and political campaigns, etc., use AI extensively already, and this is only going to get bigger in the coming years. That's one side. The other side is that suddenly politics, well, maybe not suddenly, but this has gone out. It's increased a lot recently. Politics has gotten very, very interested in AI, right? There's been, I don't know if you know this, but since ChatGPT came out, almost 1,000 AI bills have been introduced across America. So this is the degree of political interest in AI. So I think people, deserve to know about this and what some of the issues and the choices are. And I thought that a satire was a very good way to do it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I want to get to that before we get into some of the specifics. Well, without doing any spoilers or anything like that, can you give listeners sort of a sense of what your book is about?
Sure. The plot of the book can really be summarized in just a few words, and it is that ChatGPT runs for president. And you can already see the jokes creating themselves. So, in slightly more detail, there's a couple of grad students at Stanford who come up with a new algorithm with which they think they've solved AI, because that happens to all of us. That's, of course, part of the spoof. And then they create a startup to commercialize it. It's not going very well, as often happens, and they need a stunt. And then there are these Supreme Court decisions that by which at one point there's one night where they're getting drunk, and one of the protagonist is Ethan, the CEO of the company, who's the more gung-ho guy, the more megalomaniac, if you will, and then the CTO, who's a shyer person, etc., and Arvin, and Arvin says, at this point, an AI could run for president, given these decisions. And Ethan goes, that's it. That's what we need. We're going to run our chatbot for president as a stunt. And so they do that, as a stunt, because, again, that's what AI companies do these days. But then what happens is this libertarian trillionaire, which, by the way, everybody and everything in this book is inspired by someone illustrating something. Case in point, there's this libertarian trillionaire, which you won't really have to stretch your mind much to figure out who is inspired by, who decides to bankroll the Prezibot campaign. And to their great surprise, Prezibot wins the Republican primary. Also because Prezibot at that point, this is in 2040, is the only moderate candidate in a field that is composed almost exclusively of populists. So he wins the Republican primary, and suddenly they had this moment where we're in the general election. What do we do now? And so this is, it's a dozen-person startup of basically a bunch of bumbling fools. But here's the thing. The candidate on the other side, the Democratic candidate, is a fake Native American chief. It's this social media influencer who did this stunt for attention, also did this stunt, that's part of a commentary, but a different one, where he, quote-unquote, invaded America from his reservation and made it all the way to Washington, D.C., became very famous as a result. So now he's running on a platform of abolishing the United States and returning the land to the indigenous nations. So, Kumbaya, as the startup is called, they may be a bunch of bumbling fools, but if they lose the election, it's the end of America. On the other hand, the attack line the Democratic candidate's name is Raging Bull, and the Kumbaya's candidate is called Prezibot. Raging Bull's attack line against Prezibot is that he's the AI apocalypse. He's Skynet. He's Terminator. If he wins, the robots are going to come and kill all of us. So at one point, Ethan, in this odyssey that he goes through in San Francisco, where most of it takes place, asks someone, so who would you vote for? And the guy says, well, if Raging Bull wins, it's the end of America. But if Prezibot wins, it's the end of humanity. So, you got to choose the least of evils.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels there for sure. I want to talk a little bit about Prezibot, obviously. Understandably, Prezibot's a big proponent of technology, and there is one element of what Prezibot kind of is about, something called Prezi App. And I wanted to talk about Prezi App because it's something that I could actually see some Silicon Valley types saying, this is a brilliant idea. And so I was hoping you could explain what Prezi App is, how it works in the book, and also, I think maybe more importantly, in a sense, how something like that could conceivably work in the real world of American politics.
Right. So there are two versions of Prezibot in the novel. And actually, the novel is the arc by which Ethan goes from Prezibot 1.0 and discovers the idea of Prezibot 2.0 and then what happens with it, which is the final third of the book. Prezibot 1.0 is just ChatGPT, essentially, as we know it. It actually illustrates in quite realistic and accurate terms the AI that we have today. Prezibot 2.0 is where AI might go, and some would say should go. So what happens in the novel, again, without too many spoilers, is that Prezibot has a kill switch, the panic button, which is something that a lot of people advocated AI should have. A kill switch is if the AI starts to misbehave, you can push that button and either shut it off or take control. So Ethan has this, and it's a small app on a that Arvin rigged together really quickly on a cell phone that basically lets him take control of Prezibot and start talking through it. So the novel actually opens with the first debate and Ethan, in a cold sweat, thinking that Prezibot's going to hallucinate or say something stupid and it's going to be the end of the campaign, and clutching the kill switch. But then what happens, and this is really the MacGuffin of the novel, if you will, is that Ethan loses the kill switch. And of course, this both illustrates the dangers of kill switches. And by the way, California had a law that almost passed. It passed both chambers, and then Gavin Newsom vetoed it, SB 1047, that among other things mandated, right? If that law had passed, all AIs owned by any company operating in California would have had to have a kill switch. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, so Ethan loses the kill switch, and there's a big fight for possession of the kill switch, which of course symbolizes the struggle for power over AI, right? Because one of the main things of the book is don't think about the AI, think about the people controlling it. But then the epiphany that Ethan has, which leads to Prezibot 2.0, is that, well, this is a democracy. All these people fighting about over control of the kill switch, maybe they should all have a kill switch, right? It's a democracy. Why should one person have a kill switch? Let's give a kill switch to everybody. So what they do, and this happens very quickly because it's the last few weeks of the campaign and that's all they have time for, is they just literally give everybody a kill switch. So now you, a citizen of America, can download to your phone an app called Prezi app. And what Prezi app does is crowdsourced intelligence. You can push the button and start talking with any time that you want. Prezibot, of course, has a robot body, but is really this vast data center where things are running. Everybody's input goes into that data center in real time, and then the AI reasons with it to figure out what is that people want and what compromises to make. It's real-time voting, if you will, and also uses your knowledge, whatever you say, to decide what to say and do. So this is actually so if you will, Prezibot 2.0 and Prezi app are something that, technologically it's completely feasible today, is crowdsourced democracy. And again, part of what inspires the book in this respect is that there are experiments of this type of thing being done in various places around the world. And as you say, there are probably some tech billionaires who think why don't we have this already?
And I guess part of one of my initial reactions to that was based on an old saying that I know you're familiar with, certainly, a lot of listeners are, from computer science: garbage in, garbage out, meaning that, right? But you know what I'm saying? In this sense, if we're relying on this kind of instantaneous crowdsourced policymaking or democracy from people who not only maybe don't know a lot, but okay, if there are random errors, maybe they cancel out in a large enough population. But if there are non-random population-wide biases in people's thinking, well, then all of a sudden you get just atrocious public policy and a recipe for disaster. And I wanted to get your take on that.
Absolutely. So underneath all the fun, the book has some serious points, right? It deals with some real issues. And in particular, the one of the key issues that this book deals with, again, in a humorous way, is the age-old trade-off between direct democracy and representative democracy. If you think about it, each of these has very serious issues, which the founding fathers were very worried about. For example, one of the reasons there's a Senate and an electoral college is that they were afraid of mob rule. And so if you think of direct democracy, a priori actually seems like, a very natural thing. It's what they had in Athens. Everybody meets in the agora and they discuss things and then they make decisions. Isn't that beautiful? Now, there's two problems with that. One is that it doesn't scale. You can't do direct democracy in a country of 300 million people. It's just not possible. But AI, and this is where the AI comes in and where I think there's interesting things for us to think about. With AI, direct democracy can scale, right? The whole problem that you can't have 300 million people in a dialogue at the same time, actually, guess what? At this point, we can. And in some ways, social media are a very broken way of doing that. So this is one problem, but the other problem which you allude to is that direct democracy can lead to mob rule. And we don't want mob rule, right? Should we just leave government in the hands of the people like that? Sounds a little alarming. But here's the thing, and this to me is actually a really fascinating question from both the political and the scientific point of view. Think about the following, this is so, if you get a bunch of people together, they could turn into a mob, right? The madness of the mob. The intelligence of a bunch of people together could be less. Famously, a crowd is stupider than an individual. So if you put a bunch of people together, you could get a mob. Very bad. On the other hand, there's also the wisdom of the crowd. There are all these experiments, like, for example, prediction markets are a good example of this. The most accurate predictions about just about everything more accurate than the experts and the polls and everything, are made by prediction markets. You ask people who's going to win this election, how much is this movie going to gross, and the prediction market, which is basically just a bunch of people voting, right? The prediction market is systematically more accurate. Even like, and these experiments go back to the 19th century. You tell, 100 people to guess the weight of a cow, and their estimate of the weight of the cow is better than the expert's estimate of the weight. So if you combine the people the right way, you get wisdom of the crowd. If you combine them the wrong way, you get madness of the mob. And there's this whole field in economics and in AI called mechanism design, which is designing the process by which, something happens. Like, for example, the Constitution is really a piece of mechanism design, if you look at it from this point of view. The Constitution lays out the mechanism by which we make decisions. And here's the thing. The Constitution is a mechanism designed in 1787 with the technology that was available then, right? You needed, electoral college partly because, people had to ride their horses to Washington, D.C. to go and vote, right? There wasn't even a telegraph. And now we live in the days of the internet. So maybe some other form of mechanism is a better one, designed very precisely, with this issue in mind of getting the wisdom of the crowd. And the bigger the crowd, potentially the better the wisdom, as opposed to the madness of the mob. Now, just to complete the picture, on the other side, there's their representative democracy, which also has its dangers, right? The one danger of representative democracy is the cognitive limitations of our representatives. My representative represents 700,000 other people. How much can she know about who I am and what I want? Almost nothing. And again, with AI models of us, which are already being used in politics to target ads and everything else, my representative could actually know me a lot better than she knows me right now, right? So there's this possible use. Now, of course, another important issue, which also comes into play now in politics, that my representative has conflicts of interest. There's what I want, and she's there to represent me and the other 700,000, but there's also what she wants, which is actually not the same. And again, if my representative, if you will, is my digital twin in the digital agora, that properly designed, that conflict of interest actually goes away. So partly what I want to do with this book is alert people to the fact that AI, the internet to begin with, but the internet, right now I think things are a bit broken. The internet plus AI creates potentially many new ways to organize our polity than we had before. And I would be surprised if some of those aren't better than what we have today. So we should start thinking about that. Also because, the autocracies on their side are going full tilt using technology to improve themselves. So if we don't do the same, things might turn out a little different in the 21st century than they did in the 20th.
On that notion of it, when you were talking about that, it occurred to me that you could argue that sort of now that we have, or we're getting to the point where we have technology, can almost make the intermediary role of the politician unnecessary, just to eliminate that conflict of interest by eliminating the politician and their career goals and things like that. And I can see the power of that idea. But on the other hand, when I think about what I know, which is very little about how these LLMs work, it's my understanding is that almost nobody in sort of a really deep sense understands how they work, at least in the sense of you can't sort of reverse engineer their output and say, well, it did GPT or Claude gave me this because of these inputs and these sort of processes. And so it seems to me that it's sort of a black box, and that creates some other potentially pretty significant transparency and control issues as well. Is that, can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. The LLMs we have today are not ready for this. And as you say, they create their own dangers. One of the most important things in the kind of mechanism design or different constitution that I'm talking about, if you will, is that the AI has to be transparent. You have to be able to see how your input influenced the final decisions, and you have to be able to satisfy yourself that the final decisions were made in accordance. For example, if you were overridden, it's because there were more people that wanted the opposite or some other good reason. You had the facts wrong, or et cetera, et cetera. And LLMs don't let that happen. Now, LLMs are not the only kind of AI. There are many kinds of AI that are actually quite transparent that probably we should use instead of LLMs. There's also the AI is progressing rapidly, right? Remember, the novel happens in 2040, although 2040 is really a caricature of 2024. So, and these problems that LLMs have, people are working on them very, very intensely to try and overcome them. So there will be some progress. To what extent and what will be the best kind of AI to have at the end of the day remains an open question. But here's another side of your question is the following. Should we do away with politicians entirely? I'm actually suspicious of that. So you could take, this idea that I've described to the extremists, so like, we're just going to let AI do the whole thing. We don't need those, we don't need those politicians anymore. And I'm very suspicious of that idea. And in fact, part of what the book is making fun of is the naive technologist's view of politics. So President 1.0, its campaign slogan is "Optimize America!" ! That's actually the title of the first chapter, because they go in with this notion, which of course President is embodying, that hey, solving America's problem is just a big optimization problem. You give us your inputs, and we'll do the optimization, and everything will be great. And they believe this. They don't realize that democracy, a society is not an optimization problem. It's a non-zero sum game. And so part of what the book is their arc in discovering fairly quickly that this ain't going to work. First of all, because it's not going to win votes against a populist, which is Raging Bull is basically a left-wing Trump. So it's like technocracy versus populism, and we know how that goes. So they discover that very quickly. The other thing that they discover, and the book has some scenes to illustrate, like these town halls with President, is that when you just do this, there's all these contradictions, right? People want different things, and moreover, the same people want things that are incompatible, right? They want more stuff from the government, and they also want to pay lower taxes. So what do? Right? So very quickly realize that this naive notion of just taking the politics of the equation doesn't work. How this all is going to play out in the end and what is the best way, I don't know. In a way, part of what's good about writing a novel versus an essay or a nonfiction book is that I'm just trying to call people's attention to the fact that there's not a lot of different things that we can do in politics with AI. And so far, it's like, oh, we're going to use AI for targeting people and manipulating them. This is, we need to think about this I think we should think about this as if we were the founding fathers. Imagine if the founding fathers had AI in 1787, right? They had this long discussion about what kind of constitution to design. We should have that discussion today and then have a corresponding better democracy that we can probably have with AI instead of with the technology that they had back in 1787.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
This episode is brought to you by Vonage. Have you figured out how to build more engaging customer and employee experiences while growing your bottom line? It's easier than you think. Vonage Fusion brings together your contact center, business communications, and CRM to streamline internal collaboration and improve overall customer experience. Learn more about the benefits of customer and employee communications in perfect harmony at Vonage.com.
I think that's a great point. But when you were talking about that, it made me think about what the founding fathers drew on, and there were some classic texts and the spirit of the laws and various things, but it was sort of a haphazard sort of thing. And now I think about how I engage with AI to kind of have philosophical conversations, and it's amazing the things that come up when I use it as a tool as opposed to an answer machine. And I can see how that would really change things an awful lot to really kind of sort of a positive view, to really broaden the scope of what we can kind of bring into these conversations and find connections. And to me, that's sort of the optimistic side of this.
Yeah. I mean, so there's really two sides to using this crowdsourced AI. One is doing the people's will, right? I mean, the point of a democracy is that at the end of the day, you do what the people want. And I don't, I'm an expert, I'm a professor, but I'm a member of the expert class, if you will. but I don't feel that I know better than people what is good for them, right? I can inform them, I can educate them, I can share my opinion, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to decide for you what is best for you. Only you know that. You know, I may know more AI or economics or whatever than you do, but you know your life way better than I can, and even more so. Like, you know, for every expert, there's a million other people. So you're really comparing the intelligence of a few people with the intelligence of many. So there's that part, but there's another part which is again interesting related to the experts as well, which is, let's say we've decided that the people want X. Now the question becomes, how do we implement it? And a lot of the problem with the political process today is that so much crap happens just because, you know, to be very blunt, of the sheer ignorance of our representatives, right? And again, they're human, right? You know, some of them could definitely do a better job than they do, but they can only know so much, right? But they're often making decisions about stuff that, like, really is beyond what they understand. And with AI, right, this is the beauty of even something like LLMs and ChatGPT, even though they still have this reliability problem, is that, like, they just know so much. It's like, I'm a politician, I'm a policymaker, I don't know, the mayor of a city. I have to decide on this issue, I'm about to do this. And I can consult the AI and say, like, okay, what am I getting right and wrong? What are issues that I haven't thought of here? And at the end of the day, make a much better decision based on this vast pool of knowledge that in essence, the AI can draw all of humanity's knowledge versus me and the few people I managed to talk to that day.
Right. And another thing that occurred to me is, even if we eliminated politicians and just went through some kind of Prezibot sort of thing, there's still the question of how that Prezibot or whatever it is being programmed. It reminded me in a way, weirdly, of, I used to be a huge just Civilization the game addict, and it would be frustrating to me at times that I couldn't get the outcomes I wanted because of what I felt were some of the bad assumptions built into the game. And so naturally, I got a kit where I could go into God mode and change things around. And then the game worked out the way I wanted to, or ideally, if I made a few little tweaks here and there. And it seems to me that that kind of gets to the inherent subjectivity in a lot of what we do in politics. And so that idea of optimize America, that really kind of doesn't necessarily mean anything in and of itself, because you can't get away from these subjective decisions, whether it's in programming GPT or Gemini or what have you. I know a lot of conservatives say, well, you know, they spit out this liberal garbage. And well, I would say part of that has to be because of some of the assumptions and some of the things that the programmers built into it. And I wanted to get your take on that as well.
Absolutely. So the mechanism design itself is a political process, right? When you design the constitution of a country, like, for example, Chile recently just had this whole debacle, right, where they had a constituent assembly, they designed an ultra-left-wing constitution that was then rejected, and then another one. The whole design of the constitution is very much a political process. And in some sense, it's the most important because it sets the rules of the game. And as you say, there is no magical, beautiful, good way, one way to set the rules. This is the naive notion of the optimized America that precisely the book is making fun of. The rules by which this AI, this Prezibot, this crowdsourced AI works, they are going to be decided by us. And it's going to be, a big conflict. And again, what the big fight over the kill switch of Prezibot illustrates is precisely the struggle for control of this mechanism. We are going to have to decide what this mechanism is. And of course, it's not going to be in one step, because it's going to happen at the local level, state, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is going to be a whole process. But this whole process is going to be a fight, right? Because, of course, the way you design the mechanism loads the cards permanently, right? If I'm the left wing, whatever, and I get to design the mechanism the way I want, I get to have my left wing point of view prevail for a long time. For example, if the tech company, let's suppose it's like, we're going to outsource this to the tech companies, what could go wrong? The tech companies will make decisions, consciously or not, according to the political preferences or beliefs, etc., of the people who work there. And you'd probably come out with something that, for example, progressives might be happy with, because most people at tech companies are progressive, and conservatives might be very unhappy with, as we already see the examples of today. So part of what I'm saying to people in this book is the age-old You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. You better start thinking about how you want AI to play into politics, because if you don't, other people will do this mechanism design, and then you won't be happy with the result.
Yeah, one of the things that really scares me, might be too strong of a word, but concerns me about what I sense comes out of a lot of Silicon Valley with AI is a sort of ahistorical hubris, this idea that, well, if we just throw enough data, throw enough computing cycles at a problem, we can solve it. And it seems to me that if you look back throughout history, literally every utopian vision has crashed and burned. And especially I'm concerned when these utopian visions aren't being pushed by just some random kooks or, some uninfluential people, but by literally the richest people on the planet. And that gives me a lot of pause. I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about what I guess I'm calling Silicon Valley utopianism and how big of a concern you think it is, if you think it is at all?
I agree.
Okay.
So there is this strand of naive utopianism in Silicon Valley, and it's a bunch of engineers who are very good at engineering, but as you say, a lot of them know almost no history. What they've read, however, is a lot of science fiction, and they're too influenced by science fiction and not enough by history. And again, part of what I'm doing with this book is speaking to the technology crowd, to my friends and colleagues in Silicon Valley, and try to wake them up a little bit to what reality is like. Now, to be fair, some of these tech billionaires, several of which I've met, they are not stupid people and they are not naive people, but they have a certain orientation. They do have certain things that they know a lot more than others. They often, for example, know more science fiction than history. So, in many ways, as smart and competent as they are, you wouldn't want to put them in charge. Now, in fairness to the Silicon Valley crowd, I should also say the following, which is, I think, something that's important but not obvious at all, which is the way technology has played out over and over again is the following. The technologists work on this technology because they know it's going to make the world a better place, right? AI is just the latest example. At least there's also the people who have their alarms, but, thinking about the utopians for a second, it's like AI is going to cure cancer and solve the climate crisis and everything else. AI is, is going to solve all our problems. But there were optimists like that before about the steam engine and electricity and cars and planes and et cetera, et cetera. And then what happens is that as soon as the technology starts to have real world impact, and AI is very much now, the poster child for that, everybody else comes crowding in. Everybody wants to take control of the technology and use it for their purposes, all the way to, building tanks and bombers and things like that, right? And then when those people all come crowding in, all different groups in society, you have a big fight, which is what's happening with AI right now. And then, in the short term, there are winners and losers. But then, in the long term, this is what's remarkable. You're right that, utopias don't happen, but we do almost invariably wind up with a better world than we had before. The world is better for the internet, despite its flaws. The world is better for having computers and cars and electricity and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in the end, in the long arc of history, ironically, in some ways, the naive technologists were right. It's just that if that's all that what makes the technology go right in the end is us fighting this fight to make it better and not make it worse. So if the naive technologists were right, they would be wrong, if you will. It's kind of ironic, but the truth is that at the end of the day, after all this process that they didn't anticipate, things do tend to come out better. But, for example, in AI today, we need to become aware of that. People from all quadrants and with all their individual preferences, etc., they need to realize that AI is not just something that's going to happen and be better by some magic. AI, like every technology, is going to give more power to the people who control it and less power to the ones who don't control it. So my question is, which one of those do you want to be?
Yeah. I think what a lot of people feel is different about AI. I mean, you hear the hype is the biggest thing since electricity or even since fire. You've heard all these wild things. But I mean, there are, I think, some very real ethical concerns. And it seems to me that it's really difficult to expect or maybe even unrealistic to expect these companies to self-regulate, especially in the U.S. I mean, if let's say if OpenAI and Anthropic, they say, well, we'll slow things down. Well, then you have like that Chinese model Qwen from that's like right up there, and some other models in countries that you mentioned this before, authoritarian regimes that they're not going to slow down. And so it feels like it's this inexorable advance that no one really is going to get a handle on. And just basically the technologists are going to do as much as they can do as quickly as they can. And we just have to hope the results are okay. Am I being too pessimistic here? I hope I am.
Well, yes, in some ways, maybe no in others, but there's really two very different parts of your question. One is the self-regulation, and the other one is the slowing down. Now, it is true that you can't just let tech giants self-regulate, and the government should be on top of them on our behalf, very much so, for multiple reasons. But, first of all, I mean, I know a lot of people at these companies, including people very high up, and the truth is that to a much larger extent than people realize, these companies do self-regulate. They actually self-regulate a lot, and in fact, if they didn't, we'd be in deep trouble. They self-regulate for a couple of different reasons. One is that it is often to their economic benefit to self-regulate. They'd rather, I mean, trust me, they would rather self-regulate than be regulated from the outside. So we'll do a lot of stuff to just avoid that happening, right? In purely their self-interest, number one. And, in multiple ways that we could get into. But also, and less appreciated, these companies often self-regulate out of good intentions. I mean, those good intentions, at the end of the day, these are public companies, and they wound up, when push comes to shove, taking a backseat to making more money, so we shouldn't be naive about that. But it is the case that all these people, at Google and OpenAI and Anthropic and Microsoft and Elon Musk and etc., they actually all have good intentions. They are not bad human beings. They are not just, evil people just trying to, just being greedy, blah, blah, blah. And for example, on AI, a lot of them are trying to do the right thing. In fact, often, in many ways, falling flat and doing the wrong thing. But so self-regulation does happen. And moreover, and maybe more importantly for us, the citizenry, the best thing we can do with tech companies and a lot of other things is, again, create the mechanisms, create the incentives that will cause them to self-regulate and make it to their advantage to self-regulate. If we can do that, that's the best. When that fails, and usually to some extent and in some aspects that always fails, then we have no choice but to make laws and have enforcement and whatnot. But that has its own problems like regulatory capture and conflicts of interest and the lobbying and blah, blah, blah. So there's a whole bunch of issues there. There are downsides to just doing explicit regulation that a lot of people, for example, calling for AI regulation with their lack of knowledge of history don't seem to realize, right? Like government regulation and the agencies that are needed for that and the blah, 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 and the expense, blah, that has a cost too. That has its downsides. So that should be our last resort. So this is the self-regulation part. Now the slowing down part. Notice how there's an assumption in what you're saying, which is that what we should do with AI is slow it down. We are in this race. We are careening towards disaster. And it's interesting because there are people with different concerns about AI, from the short-term ones like the jobs apocalypse and perpetuating bias and et cetera, to the AI extinction, Terminator is going to come. And they're at loggerheads with each other because they each think the others are distracting from the more important problems, which to me is entertaining. And again, we get a little flavor of this in 2040, among other things. But what these people all have in common, ironically, is that they all think that the solution in one way or another is to slow down, constrain, put guardrails on AI. And I understand that's an intuitive notion, but think about the following. What is the biggest danger of AI? The biggest danger of AI, and this is not some future danger, it's the danger that we already have now, is not that the AI suddenly becomes evil, because that is science fiction. It's that AI is incompetent. The problem with AI today, and ChatGPT is a great illustration of this, right, with the crap that it does. Half the time it's brilliant, and then the other half it's just the things that no 2-year-old would, right? And AI, chatbots aside, is already making every day millions of decisions, and many of them are wrong. Because the AI is just a model that was learned from there. It doesn't have any common sense. It doesn't know anything. It knows a lot of some things and nothing about others that are very important. So the biggest danger from AI is the AI screwing up because it's too stupid. And really, This is one of the messages of 2040 is like, don't worry about Terminator, worry about Presibot, right? If all that happens when people read 2040 is like when they picture AI, instead of picturing Terminator with its infinite evil and, unlimited intelligence, they picture Presibot, which is screwing up and controlled by humans that are also screwing up and trying to fix things, and they have their content. This is the real picture of AI. So the solution to these dangers of AI is not to slow it down. It's actually the opposite. Intelligent AI is safe AI. Stupid AI is unsafe AI. Also because stupid AI is easier to manipulate and et cetera, et cetera. So maybe paradoxically, maybe counterintuitively, what these companies should do, the race in some ways is a good thing. There are ways in which the race can produce bad outcomes, but leaving those aside for a second, having faster development of AI is an improvement. We are better off with smarter AI, for example, that doesn't hallucinate, that is more reliable, than we are with the AI that we have today.
Yeah. And I guess one of my concerns about people who talk about slowing down development is that I'm glad that sort of the leading companies, at least at this point, more or less in AI, seem to be U.S. based, whereas I read these news from the various AI newsletters I get about developments in AI from China, and I think, well, I'd rather have us control this technology or have a leading role, at least a democratic state, as opposed to China. Do you think I'm too worried about the AI threat from China particularly?
No, you are 100% right about that. In fact, I raise the alarm about this every time that I can. In fact, I just gave a talk at the, NBR, the National Bureau of Economic Research, has this conference now on economics and AI. And I gave a talk there, just a few weeks ago on the state of the race between AI and China. And my message was, we need to raise the alarm because China's going to win the race. The US is still ahead. It varies by field. In some fields, subfields of AI, China's already ahead. But if you look at the slope, if you look at the trajectory, China is going to pass us. And this is alarming because AI is the key technology of the 21st century. Whoever dominates in AI will dominate economically, politically, and militarily. And if it's China that dominates AI, we are going to live to regret it. So we really need to get on the ball here. So there is a race. There's a race between companies. There's even a race between individuals about who does their job better with AI and therefore who gets the job and who doesn't. But at the largest level, there is a race between countries, right? And China is completely explicit about this. They have a 5-year plan and they're making massive amounts of investment, and their plan is to dominate AI, right? I mean, like the previous book that I wrote, The Master Algorithm, one of the reasons it got famous was that Xi Jinping had it on his shelf while giving, this was years ago, while giving his, year-end speech, right? And they do this to send a message. It's like, we want everybody on top of this AI thing. And the truth is, we are too complacent or oblivious or worrying about how AI is a danger to democracy. We need to realize that AI is a tool, and democracy with AI may or may not prevail over autocracy with AI. And China's already on the ball on this, and we aren't. So first of all, if China wins the AI race, their companies will dominate a whole slew of fields. Like, for example, America dominates the internet today, right? There are no European tech giants because Europe screwed that up, right? Let us not do the same with AI, which unfortunately we're in danger of doing, right? So they will dominate a lot of industries and get all the economic benefits that go with that, but it doesn't end there. Their system will then be perceived as being better. It'd be like, democracy. Look, autocracy is what gives us the most advanced technology and the biggest benefits. That's the second one. And then, as we've been talking about, an autocracy can, they can use AI for surveillance, for repression. Like, it's a great tool for an autocrat, right? So they will win in that regard as well. But then at the end of the day, maybe the biggest issue is militarily, right? We've lived in a world for the last 80 years that was founded on U.S. military strength, right? I mean, this is the reality, right? Without it, we would be in a very different place, like we were in 1930 or 1940, right? And first of all, in terms of conventional power, America is in some ways already outmatched by China. They're going to have a bigger army, a bigger navy, a bigger air force. We can't compete with that. They can, right? China's the world's largest shipbuilder, right? The U.S. doesn't build any ships. So if there's a war, it's going to be like, let me put it this way. The U.S. won World War II at the end of the day because we had we could produce, ships and tanks and planes faster than the other side. Today, that advantage is on China's side. And that's not about to change. So unless we have an advantage in AI, which may very well be decisive, we're already in trouble. If on top of that, China has the advantage, we're just going to lose. And, I'll give you a small example, drones, right? Drones, as we see in Ukraine, are changing the battlefield. I can have a carrier group that costs bazillions and bazillions of dollars, right? But my carrier group is this, it's prepared to deal with, a few missiles coming its way. If what the carrier group coming its way is, 10,000 drones, it's not going to work. And China is the leader. That is one of the areas where China is the leader in drones today. And America's nowhere. We have, Anduril, and China has 200 companies.
Yeah, that I guess that's really what scares me is that I read these stories about whatever Anthropic or OpenAI getting a new funding round or trying to get a new funding round of a few billion here or there, and I think, but isn't that not nearly as much as what China can kind of throw into it from their state-run industrial policy on a massive way, and that almost keeps me up nights sometimes.
Yeah, and by the way, there's another aspect here which is kind of interesting and potentially important, which is, so China does have this aspect where they have this, state-directed evolution, if you will. That is, as we very well know, that is a double-edged sword, right? They can also waste a ton of money that way. But the thing that people maybe are less conscious of about China is that they actually have a private sector that in many ways is savagely capitalistic in a way that America just isn't. So, for example, their drone industry, which is the world leader, it didn't come out of the state, for the most part, 90-something%, I would say. It didn't come out of the state saying like, oh, let's put a lot of money into this. There are other areas where this has happened with mixed results, but the drone industry exists because of the ferocious competition between hundreds and hundreds of drone companies. So China, for all that it is controlled by the Communist Party, in many ways is an unbridled capitalistic economy. And that's why, and then they have this competition internally. This has happened in other areas, like many others, right? They have this ferocious internal competition, and the companies that come out of this are world-beating champions. Just one example is electric vehicles, right? They're about to eat Tesla's lunch, right? I mean, honor to Elon for having pulled off creating a car company in America in 2020. But the truth is, the Chinese are on track to win, right? And so, what I say to people is, Anduril is great, but we need 100 Andurils. We need 1,000 Andurils. We need, and we can do that, right? Actually, America should not have a problem doing that.
Right. And I guess when I hear the response as well, we'll simply keep Chinese vehicles out of the U.S. market. I think, well, that seems to me rather that what we should be doing is trying to create a system, an environment in which we can actually compete with those vehicles in some way. And of course, labor costs, that's not a way, you can't do that, but certainly in technology. And that's the sort of thing that really concerns me about that. And that ties into AI as well, I'm sure.
So I agree with that with some caveats so the caveat is the following. Part of the problem with Chinese EVs is that they are massively subsidized by the government. And this is just unfair competition. Right, so we need to protect against unfair competition. If they're subsidizing their exports, we need to, put tariffs on them to the same extent, right? So that then it just becomes the Chinese government giving the American government money. And sure, thank you, you can do that. But we can't let them do this thing of like, we're going to kill your industry by subsidizing ours, and then when yours is dead, we'll take over, right? Like we have remedies for that, right? That's what we have the WTO and blah, blah, blah for, right? And by the way, Europe is already seeing this, right? Like Europe has, the car industry is very important there, right? In Germany in particular. And they have these big mandates for electric vehicles because of the climate crisis, blah, blah, blah. And China is coming in and just destroying them, right? And now they're starting to backtrack. So I think guarding against the unfair competition from the Chinese, which they have absolutely no qualms about doing, is important. Also, China has this policy, which again is very different from America, but, similar to other countries, some of them democracies, of they will use the power of the state to spy on their company's behalf, to give them every unfair advantage that they can to steal IP, to et cetera, right? They just do this with complete shamelessness, right? And we have to combat that as well, right? So free trade only happens on top of a system that, some of it is just military force, but the other of it is things like this, right? So we need to protect that. Having said that, you're absolutely right. Trying to, if China's, there is no alternative to winning the race, because if China is making better EVs, et cetera, and what we're doing is keeping them out, and our industry is now evolving as fast as theirs as well, what's going to happen? They're going to have much better cars, much better everything than we do. And people can see that, right? This is what happened with the Soviet Union. People were voting with their feet, right? The West was doing economically better than the East, and that's why we won, right? And so if we just take the attitude we're going to keep them out, we are the new Soviet Union, and China is the new America. So we can't let that happen. There is no choice but trying to win the race.
Getting back to your book, 2040, 16 years from now, that's not that much time, although maybe in AI and LLM development, it's a ton of time. And I know when I've been listening to this debate, I feel like there are people on one side who say, my God, the world's going to be a completely different place in just a few years, human levels of intelligence and generalized intelligence and just around the corner. Then there are other people who say, this is a real standard thing. You get a bunch of developments right at first, but we're not kind of hitting a point of diminishing returns. And really the curve's going to essentially has flattened out, and we're not going to see this kind of massive, rapid development. Can you give me a sense of where, based on your expertise, you feel like which one of these views might actually be a little more right at this point?
Right. So I should preface this with the following. Why does the novel take place in 2040, right? 2040 is very near future, right? There's near future and far future science fiction, but even the near future tends to be, 100 years out, something like that. And I want 2040 to be very close to give people a sense of urgency. It's like, we're heading here in our lifetimes. And, part of the book is a dystopian world, like what society has turned into. And really what I'm trying to do is say to people, look, it's a warning. It's like, this is where we're going. Do you want to let that happen, or do you want to do something else? So 2040 is deliberately very close. Also, 2040 is really a caricature of 2024. So 2040 isn't really about, 2040 any more than Animal Farm is about animals or farming. It's a caricature of today, right? I'm holding this mirror out to people saying this is where we are. Now, having said that, right, you raised this very important question of like, well, where are we going to be in 24? Let's just take that question literally for a second. And part of the subtext of the book, which again is not accident, is that like, hey, the world in 2040 in many ways is not going to be that different from the world today. And again, this gets back to the naive technologism, which is the following. The rate at which progress happens is limited by several things. One is the rate at which the technology progresses, right? And even if AI today starts making infinitely rapid progress, like suppose that we already have human-level AI right now, progress can only happen at the rate that humans can absorb it. Humans, psychologically, sociologically, politically, economically, right? There's all these systems that, and again, we know this from history, like electricity took a long time to actually have a big impact because you had to redesign factories again around them. Same with with the steam engine, same with computers, right? Decades after computers, there's still a debate about how much have they increased productivity. So even if AI made infinitely rapid progress, the rate limiting factor would be humans, which again is part of the theme of 24 is that it's really the humans screwing up that are the key issue, right? So even if we had solved AI today, in many ways, 2040 would not be that different from today. We would still have the same fights, and the technology would have percolated very unevenly, right? As William Gibson famously said, the future is already here. It's just very unevenly distributed. That is only going to be exacerbated by AI in the coming years. But also on the just AI progress side of things, right, which was part of your question, I think that the LLM technology that we have today, it will asymptote somewhere, right? Like technology is not an exponential. People keep talking about exponentials apropos of AI, like the singularity, blah, blah, blah. But in the real world, there are no exponentials. They're physically impossible. Things always plateau at some point. But what's going to happen is probably LLMs are going to plateau. That is going to cause a lot of changes, right? So let us not minimize that. But real human level AI is going to have to come from other things that hopefully we are going to invent in the next some years. And how soon that next bigger wave will happen is very hard to predict because, again, it depends on people's creativity and where the problems are and whatnot. So it could be, on the one hand, that we really are on a very, the first part of an S curve is an exponential. It could be that we are on an exponential, and because AI really is, AI is the automation of intelligence. So maybe it is as big as fire, right? If you think about it, at one end, it could be truly one of the most, one of the biggest developments that ever happened. And on at one extreme, we are on this exponential of progress by which the amount of progress that we've seen in AI in the last decade will come to seem like nothing by 2040. That is possible. It's also possible at the other end that, the current LLM technology, these transformers, et cetera, it asymptotes, and then it's decades until we get to human level AI, or centuries, or never, right? Some people say this is just too hard of a problem, or for various reasons, we're never going to get to human level AI. So, the way to plan for the future, if you're a person or a company or a country, is to know what the different scenarios are and be prepared for each one of them. AI is a very high variance technology, we need to be prepared for the full range from we have human level AI and superhuman AI within the next few years, or we actually get stuck as we have in the past for decades, and for the rest of our lives, the AI isn't going to be that much better than what we have today. And, I think, of course, most likely it'll be something in between, but how this is all going to play out is a very open question.
One of the things that I wonder about is I sort of grew up as a science fiction geek myself, and reading Asimov and Larry Brin and all those guys, and watching Star Trek, and I feel like when I see AI now, I think, well, if we can get over the hump to have truly competent AI, that would be maybe great, and maybe that could usher in that sort of future. But what I see in this interim period is it's such a powerful tool for destructive means, with things like really convincing deep fakes, not just pictures, but audio and even video now. And then I start thinking about another science fiction geek thing, the Fermi paradox, right? Why haven't we seen other intelligent life in this massive universe? Well, maybe it's because they invented AI too, and it destroyed their civilizations or so forth. And I know that's a really negative view, but boy, it sure seems to me that in the medium term, the ways that you can use AI in a destructive way to destroy trust in institutions and our fellow human beings is just truly massive. And am I being too alarmist about this? Tell me I am, please.
Maybe you are there. And let me give you an example. Disinformation, right? People are paranoid about AI being used to generate floods of disinformation. In fact, there was this survey of experts, I think it was the World Economic Forum that did it earlier this year. And disinformation, I think, was like the number one worldwide threat that they were worried about this year, right? But here's the thing, and this I think is a really good example for people to bear in mind. Disinformation, first of all, it's a much smaller problem than people think it is. And, there are studies, several large ones at this point, showing like how much does disinformation on social media influence people's voting behavior, etc. And the answer is very little. This is the reality, right? We tend to overestimate the influence that those things have. Number two, and directly to the point of AI, people are already producing a flood of disinformation without AI. The bottleneck is our attention. It's not the ability to produce disinformation at a high volume. And most important, guess what the number one tool for fighting disinformation is today? It's AI. I know the people at places like Meta and Google that work on this, and this is just completely clear-cut. Without AI, today, our social networks would be submerged in misinformation. It's AI that's looking at every post, trying to decide, is this misinformation or blah, 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 and, only letting the good ones through. And, the AI is not perfect by any means. There's a lot of progress to be made, and it needs to be complemented by humans and whatnot. But the thing is, without AI, we would be submerged in misinformation. Having the AI produce misinformation is a second-order effect compared to the positive role in fighting misinformation. And again, this is another example of where people think we need to limit the AI, but actually what we need is better AI. If the main role of AI is going to be to produce this information, then maybe it's better if it's less intelligent. if the main role of AI is to fight disinformation, and it is, then what we need is to increase intelligence so that, right now AI is playing this game of cat and mouse with the people who want to get the misinformation through, and the people are still smarter, right? So they will say things that are a little camouflaged, a little indirect, but are still putting out the disinformation, right? So from this point of view, having smarter AI is better. And more general, we'd not like to, to go to the larger picture. It is true that AI can be used for many bad things, and it is being and will be used for those many bad things. But the good things, they already dwarf the bad things, and they will dwarf them even more. And again, it's all of us trying to make good uses of AI and stop the bad uses that will make that happen. Now, AI for the rest of our lifetimes, I think, is going to be a mess, precisely because it's going to develop very quickly in some areas and cause a lot of change there. It's not going to develop in other areas. Like, for example, we still don't have house robots, right? We're nowhere near, right? Like, we need to keep this clearly in mind. Like, AI tends to progress in very different ways than we thought it would. And so then people get blindsided by both what happens that wasn't supposed to and by what doesn't happen that was supposed to. So we're going to be dealing with all of this. So we need to understand what the true limitations of AI are. And like, we just need, and like, of course, the media always creates this picture where the bad uses of AI are, it's a big nightmare and et cetera. And they give less prominence to the good uses of AI that are maybe more mundane, right? Like every company, or at least every large company these days, and even many small ones, they just use AI every day to do a lot of things, right? To optimize their supply chain, to predict demand, to recommend products, et cetera. So that part may not be as exciting or as sexy or as alarming as the disaster stories, but in the big picture, it's the more important one.
And that is exactly the sort of optimistic note I was hoping we could close on it. Well, I could talk to you easily for another hour. Our time is up, but thank you so much for coming on. And again, the book is 2040, A Silicon Valley Satire. As always, I will have a link in the show notes. And definitely, if you just want a fun read, it's great for that. But if you also want to get a sense of kind of what's potentially going on with the near future of politics and technology from someone who really knows their stuff, a great book. Pedro Domingos, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to this Politics Guys interview. If you're not already a supporter of the show, I hope you'll consider becoming one, because without our supporters, we wouldn't be able to do this. And when you become a supporter, you get not just that warm, fuzzy feeling, knowing that you're supporting a good cause. I like to think we're a good cause, but you also get stuff like ad-free versions of everything we put out. You get our supporter-exclusive midweek show, the full length of that, not just the preview. And you also get to be part of our Discord group if you want. And there's always some interesting conversations going on there. At the $10 a month level or more, you get to actually be part of the episodes Jay and I do, if that's something you're interested in. So there's a lot of stuff, is what I am saying. And I hope you'll consider checking it out. And to do that, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys. If you want to support us on Venmo, we're at Politics Guys. You can also support the show through PayPal. And all of our support links are always in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And as always, I want to close with a very special thank you to our wonderful executive producers, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,